They do not speak her name, only her title. The king's wife, the first, the one who remains. The palace scribes called her just and loyal. The court poets called her the pearl of the empire. But the women in the inner wing had no name for her, only silence, because when the king's breath stopped, hers became law. And buried in the royal archives, between hunting decrees and harvest ledgers, was a line no one noticed. It did not threaten, it did not scream. It simply said, "Upon his death, all unwed women of the harem become the charge of the queen." They lined up in the garden before dawn, 53 women, skin washed with rose water, anklets muted, eyes lowered. No one spoke. The king's body had not yet cooled, but his absence had already rearranged their futures. They had once lived under his favor, some adored, some forgotten, some never touched, but all under his shadow. Now, that shadow belonged to her, the queen. The one who had never once stepped inside the harem, yet now owned every breath within it. She did not arrive with guards. She did not raise her voice. She wore only white and walked barefoot across the stone path as if mourning. But mourning is not the same as mercy. She stopped at the first girl in line. The girl flinched. She was 17. Her name would not be remembered. The queen lifted the girl's chin with 2 fingers, examined her like a silk bolt at market, then nodded. A eunuch behind her made a mark on a clay tablet. One by one, the inspection continued. No blood, no whip, just decisions. The women were not asked to kneel, but many did, not from reverence, from knowing, because this was not new. In Susa, in Persepolis, in Ecbatana, this was the quiet law buried behind the louder ones. It had always been there, passed from one queen to another like a sealed jar of oil, the right to take what remained. Some concubines would be reassigned to temples, dressed in gray, renamed and erased. Others would become weavers or gardeners within the inner court, never to be seen again. And a few young, delicate, empty of claim would be chained, not with iron, with routine, with stillness, with the sentence of a life no longer chosen. No screams echoed through the palace that day. No protests were made. Because silence is what survives best in royal air. The queen did not smile. She did not frown. She only moved forward. And as the sun rose over the eastern walls, the women's shadows grew longer behind them. They would not be buried. Not yet. That came later. But their lives were no longer lives. They were inventory. And the queen had begun her counting. They called it custodianship, a word soft enough to pass through the mouth of a judge without drawing blood. The scribes wrote it in ink, not iron, tucked into the folds of inheritance law between livestock clauses and salt rights. It was not shouted from balconies. It was whispered between courtiers and eunuchs, exchanged like a riddle, but its weight was heavier than any chain. It meant the concubines were no longer concubines. They were wards, servants, silence wrapped in silk. Their rank died with the king, and with no husband to claim them, they fell into the hands of his wife, not as rivals, as residue, leftovers of a reign now buried beneath incense and marble. The queen did not ask for them, but she did not release them. That was the custom. To release a harem after the king's death risked rebellion, seduction, espionage. These women had seen too much, heard too much. Their beauty had once been currency, traded for closeness to the throne. But now, with that throne empty, their value inverted. The more beautiful they were, the more dangerous. The more favored they had been, the more disposable. So the queen kept them, not in chains of bronze, but in rules. A schedule was drawn. They would wake before dawn. They would bathe in cold water. They would eat from stone bowls in silence. They would speak only when spoken to, and only to the eunuchs, who relayed instructions like ghostly intermediaries. Each day was identical to the last, each step a repetition. The rooms were small, not cells, but smaller than they had known. No windows, no mirrors, no names written anywhere. They were not to write, not to speak their own names, not to touch each other except when ordered. Some were assigned to weaving, some to grinding wheat, some simply to wait. The queen walked the corridor once each week. She did not stop, she did not inspect, she listened for sound, There never was any. The silence pleased her. It was the sound of order, of things in their place. Outside the palace, the city sang. Merchants shouted prices. Children chased dust. Priests offered fruit to the fire god, and scribes etched victories into stone. But inside the chambered wing of the former harem, time moved differently. It was not counted in days. It was counted in obedience, in how many mornings passed without a single word, in how many bowls returned untouched, in how many women forgot the sound of their own voice. Some wept in corners when the candles burned low. Some stared at the same tile until sleep arrived. Some whispered prayers into their folded hands and then forgot the words halfway through. The queen knew all of this. She had once been in their place, before her rise, before her title. But she did not pity them. Pity was for women without power, and she had waited too long to surrender hers now. They called it Andish-e-Kamush, the chamber of quiet thought. But no one inside was allowed to think, not in the way that mattered. The women were moved there at nightfall, one by one, robes trailing over salt-dusted floors, escorted by eunuchs who never made eye contact. The door was low and narrow, carved into a stone corridor that had once housed the king's hunting hounds. Now it held daughters of noblemen, dancers from Bactria, slaves from the mountains. The king had gathered them like flowers. The queen now arranged them like grain. Their footsteps echoed against walls painted with faded murals of forgotten goddesses, all with eyes that watched but never wept. They were told nothing, only that they were to remain, to serve, to remember their place, but none of them knew what that place was anymore. The chamber was not a prison. There were no bars, no locks, only rules, invisible but absolute. Wake with the sun, speak only when addressed, keep the hands folded, the mouth closed, the body still. Meals arrived on trays of dull bronze, bread, salt, water, the same every day, a luxury once, now a measurement. The queen visited once each month. She did not enter. She stood just beyond the threshold, a shadow behind the curtain of jasmine smoke. The women were made to kneel in rows as a scribe read their names, one by one. A few names were followed by silence, a few followed by a short nod, others by a word, transfer, or reassignment. No one asked what that meant, because those who left were never seen again, and the silence that followed was thicker than the smoke. Some women began to unravel slowly, not with screams, with stillness. One day they stopped eating, the next they stopped blinking. A few forgot their languages altogether. Their mother tongues vanished in the dry air. They spoke in gestures, in glances, in prayers mouthed without sound. And still, the days continued. The chamber remained the same, a painted ceiling that peeled in the corners, a floor that never warmed, a room where time turned to dust. Outside, the empire shifted. Wars came and went, borders changed shape, new kings were crowned, old ones were mourned. But inside Andish-e-Kamush, nothing moved. The women aged without ceremony. Those who bled stopped bleeding. Those who had names forgot them. Those who had dreams stopped dreaming. They became not victims, not prisoners, not even servants. They became echoes. And the queen who once stood among them, who once knew the weight of waiting, never returned again. Her visits ceased. Her scribes stopped sending names. The chamber became an inheritance no one claimed, a silence that outlived the woman who created it, and the women who endured it. She was not cruel, she was consistent. That is what the court scribes would later write, that the queen upheld the law with grace, that she ruled without indulgence, that she never struck a woman even when she had the right. Her scrolls were clean. Her seals were precise. Her voice never rose. She was calm the way stone is calm, heavy, immovable, indifferent to the cries of what breaks against it. When questioned by foreign envoys about the fate of the royal harem, she answered with gentle finality, "They are safe under my care." And no one questioned what safe meant, because no one wanted to see what it cost. She held her audience in the rose pavilion, beneath a ceiling of gilded stars, where the scent of almond oil clung to every breeze. The men who bowed before her saw only beauty. The foreign queens who sent gifts saw only elegance. They did not see the doors she had sealed, the women she had inherited like winter grain. They did not see the chalk marks she placed beside the names of the quietest ones, or how often she walked the hallways of the silenced, never speaking, only listening, measuring, deciding. She said little, but her silence was not absence. It was strategy. There was a story whispered among the chambermaids, never written down, that the queen once stood outside the harem gates long before she wore the crown, that she waited for 3 days under the sun, clutching a reed basket, begging for a place inside. No one let her in. No one saw her then. When the king finally took notice, she was dressed in soot and ash. A servant's daughter, a scrap of potential. She had been polished, shaped, and swallowed into silk, but the hunger never left her. She had learned to climb not by asking but by erasing, so when the law fell into her hands, she did not flinch. She understood it. She embodied it. It was not vengeance. It was structure. Every concubine absorbed into her control was another knot tied in the tapestry of her legacy. She did not punish them because they were her enemies. She ordered them because they were variables, and variables threatened permanence. The courtiers praised her for her clarity. They said the palace was more peaceful than it had ever been. They said the queen brought order to a kingdom long ruled by desire. But in the hidden chambers, the concubines did not speak of peace. They did not speak at all. And in that silence, the queen found comfort. It was not warmth she needed. It was certainty. And every woman who ceased to resist gave her more of it. This was not kindness. This was law. This was not violence. This was architecture. And she was not their enemy. She was the one who remembered how the silence had once tasted and decided to serve it instead. They found it beneath the western foundation of the palace, not in a grand tomb, not behind a sealed mosaic door. It was a small room, square and low, tucked behind what had once been the lower servants' quarters. The floor was dust and chalk, the walls plain limestone. No inscriptions, no blessings, just air that had not moved for centuries. The archaeologists were looking for grain storage. Instead, they found bones. Dozens, layered, unmarked, all female, all small-boned, narrow-hipped. The youngest perhaps 13, the oldest not more than 25. No jewelry, no sign of burial rites, only fragments of fabric twisted at the wrist, a single carved comb, a copper pin, one bowl cracked neatly in two. They hesitated to report it, because the discovery made no sense. These were not slaves, not field workers. Their bones were too fine, their teeth too clean. But they were not royal either. No gold, no amulets, no resin or oils to mark them as noble. The excavation leader, a man who had spent decades studying Achaemenid dynasties, called it an anomaly. The younger researcher called it what it was, a burial site. No, she said, not a burial, a disposal. And then she opened the archive scrolls. In a tax record from the reign of Artaxerxes, she found a reference to domestic census reduction. In another, a letter from a queen to her steward, requesting a thinning of the inner ranks. The phrase was gentle, the meaning was not. Still, this was only suggestion, until she found the tablet, tucked into a niche near the door, sealed with wax, buried in ash, a single paragraph in Old Persian. Half destroyed by moisture, but one line still clear, and those without function shall be removed, per the lady's right of order. She did not speak for several hours after reading it. Her colleagues took photographs, measured bone length, sketched the room. But she sat on the edge of the stone slab and stared at the dust. She thought of the women, not how they died, but how they were chosen, not for rebellion, not for disobedience, but for being excess, unnecessary, without function. The law had not named them. The queen had not shouted. She had simply given the order. Quietly, cleanly, like trimming a vine too thick with leaves, and the chamber did the rest. When the report was written, the official label was discreet: Auxiliary Residence Annex, probable mortuary usage. The museum catalog named it a transitional domestic structure. No mention of the bodies, no mention of the queen, no mention of the law that allowed it, because the truth did not match the beauty of the empire's story. And yet, Beneath the palace stillness, the bones remained, pressed into the dirt like punctuation, a sentence no one wanted to finish. The queen died without ceremony. No royal parade, no chanted eulogies beneath the high arches of Persepolis. She had outlived the king by nearly 17 years. Her face had never appeared on coins, her name etched only once, discreetly, at the bottom of a temple endowment, she who maintained the harmony of the house. When she was gone, her quarters were sealed, her belongings catalogued, her scrolls burned, and the chamber she ruled, Andish-i-Kamush, was abandoned. Not emptied, just forgotten. The women inside, those who had survived, were left in the rooms they had known for decades. No orders came, no meals, no light, and slowly the silence swallowed them again. Years passed, dynasties rose and fell, the palace became a ruin, then a story, then a whisper inside a schoolbook, and the law that allowed a queen to inherit not just power but people was lost beneath translations and euphemisms. When scholars rediscovered fragments of it, they called it an anomaly, an archaic clause, a ritualistic safeguard. They described it in footnotes, distant and clean. But they never wrote about the women, about the ones who were named only in ledgers, the ones whose footsteps never left the inner court, the ones who were turned into silence before they ever had a chance to speak. In museums across Europe, clay tablets from the Queen's reign are displayed in glass. The descriptions focus on grain prices, battle routes, irrigation records. A few reference royal inventory, linen, oil, ivory, bodies, the last word translated as statues by curators who found it inconvenient, because to admit that the Queen inherited living women like she did furniture would undo the narrative, that Persia was noble, that its rulers were wise, that its queens were refined. But buried beneath that myth is a truth carved in quiet decisions, a system built not from rage, but from order, not from blood, but from obedience. The Queen did not see herself as cruel. She saw herself as a caretaker of the palace, of its rhythm, of the silence it required. The women she inherited were not her enemies, they were her burden, and she carried them like sealed jars, delicate, replaceable, without voice. No one wrote songs for them. No one carved their names into walls, but they lived, they waited, they endured. And their story, like so many others, was buried under the weight of law disguised as tradition. She was never meant to be remembered, but you remember her now, and the women she silenced by law, not blade. They speak again, because you chose to listen. If you enjoy stories like theirs, like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. I read every one,